Welcome to 21st Sports Recap and Reaction for the Green Bay Packers at the Denver Broncos in their Week 8 matchup, played November 1st, 2015, as these two teams entered the game 6-0, and it's only the fourth time where undefeated teams have faced each other 6-0 or better. And we're going to go over the scores and the stats and give our breakdown and analysis for this game. And starting off in the first quarter, with about 4.5 minutes still left in the first, Ronnie Hillman scored on a 1-yard touchdown run. McManus added the extra point, and it was 7-0 Denver as the Broncos scored first. Then in the second quarter, just a minute in, Hillman got his second touchdown of the game, a 15-yard run. McManus kicked the extra point, and it was 14-0 Broncos over the Packers. Then with about 7.5 minutes, between 7.5 8 minutes left in the half, Brandon McManus hit a 50-yard field goal, and it was 17-0 as the Broncos started the game with 17 straight points. Then with about 3 minutes left before halftime, the Packers finally got on the scoreboard as Eddie Lacy scored on a 2-yard touchdown. Mason Crosby added the extra point, and it was now a 10-point game heading into halftime with the score 17-7. So then in the third quarter, with about 9 minutes still left in the quarter, Mason Crosby hit a 56-yard field goal, and it was now a one-score game with the score Denver 17, Green Bay 10. But then the Broncos came back strong, still with the lead, but they would shut down the Packers from then on out. And with 5.5 minutes still left in the third, C.J. Anderson scored on a 28-yard touchdown run. McManus added the extra point, and now it was 24-10 as the Broncos extended their lead to 14. Then in the fourth, with about 12.5 left in the game, McManus hit a 24-yard field goal to make it 27-17 as the Broncos were back up by 17 points. And then on the next play from scrimmage for the Packers, DeMarcus Ware came in on a blitz. Rodgers, the tight end, didn't pick up the block, and so then Ware stripped Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback, and then Rodgers, the tight end, ended up jumping on the ball, and he was tackled in the end zone for the safety by Malik Jackson. And that made it 29-10, and that really put the exclamation point on this game as the Broncos improved to 7-0 and the Packers lose their first game of the year. They're now 6-1, and it's nothing, to be ashamed of to lose in Denver, but the way the Broncos won this game, they did embarrass the Packers as they just totally dominated them with their defense. That after this performance, you got to start talking about this Denver defense as being up there with some of the great defenses of all time. They're definitely starting to get into that conversation as they held Aaron Rodgers to just 77 passing yards, and the Packers only ended up with a net of 50 passing yards. So, you would not think that Aaron Rodgers would only throw for 77. It's the lowest yards he's ever had in a start in his career. He was the quickest in NFL history to get to 30,000 yards. They're actually talking about that before the game started. And here in this game, he just gets dominated by this Denver defense that is absolutely phenomenal. And I'll tell you, the way the Broncos are playing, they have not been 7-0 since 1998. And then they won the Super Bowl that year with John Elway. And with the way this defense is playing and the way they're running the ball, you can't count them out to repeat that feat again in this year. Of course, it's still early in the season, but right now, the way that the defense is dominating, it was a tremendous performance. And let's look at the numbers. Peyton Manning, 21 for 29, 340 passing yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. But Peyton was definitely getting the job done, although they were punching the ball in on the ground. As C.J. Anderson, with that 28-yard touchdown, he had 14 carries for 101 yards. and Ronnie Hillman had 2 touchdowns. He had 19 carries for 60 yards. And then we look at the Packers. Aaron Rodgers, just 14 for 22, 77 yards. No touchdowns, no interceptions. Eddie Lacy, 11 carries for 38 yards and a touchdown. Rodgers actually had 2 carries for 31 yards on the ground as well. And the receiving, Demaryius Thomas had a huge game for the Broncos. 8 receptions for 168 yards. And Green had 3 receptions for 61 yards. Owen Daniels with 3 receptions for 44 yards. And for the Packers, Randall Cobb had 6 receptions for just 27 yards to be the Packers' leading receiver. We look at the kickers. McManus, 2 for 2 on the field goals, 3 for 3 on the extra points. Mason Crosby, 1 for 1 on the field goals, 1 for 1 on the extra points. And on defense for Denver, Brandon Marshall had a forced fumble. Harris had a forced fumble. DeMarcus Ware had a forced fumble. So they were really putting the pressure on. Ware also had a sack. Von Miller had a sack. And Smith had a sack as well. And for the Packers, Randall had an interception, the only interception in the game. Then we look at the first downs. 24 first downs for the Broncos. 14 for the Packers. On third down, 6 for 12 for Denver, 50% converted, 2 for 8 for the Packers, 25% converted on third down. Total net yards, 500 for Denver. For the Packers, just 140. And on the ground, the Broncos netted 160, the Packers netted 90. And through the air, the Broncos netted 340. Peyton was not sacked at all. And for the Packers, they netted just 50 passing yards. You heard me right, just 50 passing yards netted for the Packers, as Rodgers was sacked 3 times, losing a total of 27 yards. And for the penalties, the Broncos were actually penalized 11 times for 93 yards. And the Packers just 2 penalties for 15 yards. Usually with that many penalties, that's going to hurt you. But it didn't matter the way that defense was playing. All the more goes to show how unbelievable that Denver defense is. And in the red zone, 2 for 3 for Denver, 66%, 1 for 1 for the Packers. They only made 1 trip to the red zone. And time of possession, 33 minutes, 27 seconds for Denver, 26 minutes, 33 seconds for the Packers. So the Broncos just ran all over them, and they were just moving the ball around. The Packers' defense really did not have an answer for Denver. And Denver's defense, the corners especially, with Harris and Aqib Talib, I mean, it doesn't really show up so much on the stat sheet because they didn't get interceptions, but just when you see the yards and we watched the way that they just covered the receivers, and for them to hold Aaron Rodgers to just 77 yards, 50 netted, I mean, that's incredible. They're also getting after him with their pass rush as well. But there was no one to throw to. No one was open, so those guys had the receivers blanketed. They did an excellent job of covering them, and then even covering them a second time, as Aqib Talib pointed out in the post-game press conference interview. As he was saying how with the Packers, you got to cover them twice. You recover them on their initial route, and then you cover them on their second route once Rodgers breaks the pocket. And they were doing that, and that's why they were able to shut down Green Bay. It was quite the performance. I mean, this Denver defense is just unbelievable. It reminds me of the Ravens defense back when they won the Super Bowl against the Giants back in, I think it was 2001. Yeah, the way they're playing, Peyton doesn't really need to have big games, although he did have one of his bigger games of the year, passing-wise, for yards with 340. And he was very accurate, too, 21 for 29, although he didn't get the ball in the end zone, but he didn't need to, because he had C.J. Anderson and Hillman punching it in. And, of course, McManus, as he was kicking those field goals. And the Denver defense is just dominant. They're the definition of dominance. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. Definitely interested to read your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for listening. It's greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and had a great weekend and enjoyed all the sports.